President Trump took some time Monday afternoon to highlight his administration's environmental policies, but he did it without ever mentioning climate change. It comes after Mr. Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement and rolled back regulations like the Clean Power Plan. In Monday's speech, the president insisted his administration is working to improve the environment.
For years, politicians told Americans that a strong economy and a vibrant energy sector were incompatible with a healthy environment. In other words, one thing doesn't go with the other, and that's wrong because we're proving the exact opposite.
Scott Waldman joins me now. He is a White House reporter for E&E News and focuses on climate change. Scott, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So the president didn't announce any new initiatives and didn't even say the phrase climate change. So what really was the point of the speech?
Well, that's a good question. It was sort of billed as an introduction to some sort of new environmental policy. But in the end, it really was almost like a campaign event. There was a lot of discussion about what the administration has done on clean air initiatives and clean water initiatives. And the president even mentioned solar power and his support for that. But there's no new policy to back that up. There's no new policy that's going to encourage solar power growth in the country. So really, it was sort of a greatest hits of some of his familiar talking points to anybody that's paid attention to what he's done on energy and environment issues.
Scott, the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates have been talking a lot about environmental issues, but it's not usually something President Trump addresses, as you mentioned. Does this signal a shift in his approach?
I think it definitely does. There's certainly been an increased amount of polling that's showing the president is vulnerable on this issue. Most notably, just this weekend, a poll from Washington Post and ABC News showed that of all the issues that voters ranked Trump on, climate change was the one where they had the least amount of approval for his policy. And I think it was about 29% of voters approved what he's doing on climate change, far below every other issue. So certainly there's a vulnerability there for Republicans. Trump has often denied climate science. He's mocked it. His administration has rolled back many policies that deal with climate change. And I think all of a sudden there's some nervousness in the White House and as well as on the campaign that they actually have to give something more than just talking points to this issue and try to come up with something new in terms of policy. I don't think we saw that today, though.
Well, as you mentioned, he has criticized some environmental policies of the previous administration. I want you to listen to this, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
The previous administration waged a relentless war on American energy. We can't do that. They sought to punish our workers, our producers, and manufacturers with ineffective global agreements that allowed the world's worst polluting countries to continue their practices. These radical plans would not make the world cleaner. They would just make and put Americans out of work, and they put them out of work rapidly.
President Trump has undone many of former President Obama's environmental actions. Were the Obama policies really as ineffective as the president suggested?
No, and some of them hadn't really even been allowed to fully go into effect. The Clean Power Plan had sort of been tied up in the courts, but there's plenty of evidence that that was going to reduce significantly one of our greatest sources of carbon pollution, which is the power plants that provide electricity for the country. And there's also fuel efficiency rules for cars that would have just forced car makers to put out vehicles that get better fuel efficiency, which certainly would have had a notable effect on reducing carbon emissions that drive climate change.
And Scott, President Trump blasted the Green New Deal, saying, quote, "The plan is estimated to cost our economy nearly $100 trillion. What do you make of his criticism on the plan?
Well, that number, first of all, is highly suspect. That comes from a think tank that supports the president and has gone after Democrats on environmental issues. So we don't really know what it's going to cost. It's just a broad policy resolution at this point. The president is certainly going to use that as a major club with which to hit Democrats as the primary season goes on and into the general. So you can expect more of that. And today he didn't really introduce any new talking points in terms of the Green New Deal, but it's definitely going to be his main argument against Democrats as the 2020 election really gears up, and particularly as we head into the general. We're going to hear a lot more about the Green New Deal. Many of the Democratic candidates have either said they support it directly or some version of it.
All right, Scott Waldman, thank you.
Thanks for having me.